Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade. Today I am here with Zach. Welcome, Zach. I'm so glad you're here.
Hello, it's great to be here. I'm Zach Barash. I work for Wizards, which means, yes, I'm here to just share my own opinions. And longtime listener of Recross the Paths, just very excited that I finally get to be here after a bunch of back and forth.
Oh my god. Well, the real world exists outside of podcast space. There isn't just an invisible spot in each linear week to make this happen. So it's a joy to find a window to sit down.
Yes, and the real world exists in a truer way for me than it has ever, perhaps?
Yes. So Zach and I have gotten connected in various ways, certainly through the cube space, and I think that's a really amazing way of how people get connected. But particularly in this moment, we both have this new connection as parents.
Yes. At time of recording, tomorrow is both the 6th anniversary of my first date with my wife and the day my daughter turns 1 month old. Her name is Sophia.
Insert party horn sounds.
She's amazing. Pew, 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 pew. Oh, who brought the fireworks to the air horn show?
Yeah, dangerous around children for sure. But
And Cade, you're also a family person preparing to open another family expansion booster pack.
that is that's excellent. Yeah, at time of recording, I am within about a week of the expected due date of my third child. So, yeah, watching you. The monster trucks roll through in the background here. Yeah, so it's fun for me going into a different season of parenting and then hearing you go through the very first one,
Yeah.
and then kind of marveling at, hey man, we get to enjoy this moment based on a connection that has nothing to do with any of that, but that was just a way to draw us in, and we get to be friends beyond that.
Absolutely. And I've had the good fortune of seeing a lot of my friends who I've grown up playing Magic with become parents over the last few years. My closest neighbor of all of my Magic playing friends is Dan Schneider, who, total aside, Dan Schneider, creator of the Devoid Cube and like, I don't know, 9 other cubes. Like one of my best friends in the cube community, my favorite cube designer in the world. I will literally play anything he makes because I've loved every single thing that he's made.
Dan is a rock star. I
Yeah, but
really enjoy
like
Dan.
Dan has a 2-year-old daughter, and the fact that I'm just like, Dan, I don't know what the anything, how, and Dan's like, dude, I got this. The best team drafter that I've ever played with, Hugh Kramer, who I was groomsman at his wedding, he lives like a mile west of me. He has a 3-year-old son. Like, I thankfully have a bunch of Magic parents who I've been admittedly excited to join the ranks of. And I'm really pleased that with Cade, I get to add another fantastic source of wisdom and calm, and even just being told it's going to be okay. Because you know what? It's more than okay. It's pretty. I love being a parent.
It really is a joy, and it's funny that moment where they, depending on how you approach the birth process, like for us it was kind of being left at the hospital, like, all right, this is yours now, it's time to go. And you're like, wait,
Yeah.
that's it? Like, you're just going to trust us to go out into the world with this? um
Oh, it's surreal how they just like they struck absolute terror in us about a couple of things that ended up everything was fine, and they're just like, oh cool, you're done, so long.
yeah, let us know if anything. It's like,
Wink
no, no,
wink,
no.
if you want to take anything from the room, take everything. So yeah, I felt like a Skyrim character raiding the room. But
I crouched when I was stealing things. I think it was most important.
oh, I did it straight out in the open. Let's maximize charisma over stealth.
Well, yeah, I think that this is in a different season. The way we engage with the game in this case being Cube or Magic, changes so much, right? Like the
Mm.
time that you have available and the brain space you have available shifts. Have you already? I mean, certainly this first month is pretty hands on, but I imagine you've already felt that shift.
100%. Although I'll admit, and this is me not quite talking about work, but I've felt that already. In that I've thought a lot about work life balance. I got in, what is it, 2025. I've been a full time game designer for 11 years now, and taking something that was my hobby and a side passion and the kind of thing that I would do when I got home from work in my after hours for recreation, or I don't know, because I needed a creative outlet. And then suddenly that becomes my job. And then, especially we're coming up on my 2-year anniversary of starting to work at Wizards. When my favorite game of all time becomes my job, I really have to be very mindful of what is work and what is not work when my work is itself play. So thankfully, that's something that I feel like hasn't been the hardest adjustment for me, just because I've been trying to find ways to thread that needle. The hardest part for me was missing Tarkir Dragonstorm pre-release, because Tarkir is my favorite world. Cons of Tarkir is one of my favorite booster draft formats, and I would not have it any other way, because there will be many more pre-releases and there'll be plenty of opportunities to draft that set. My daughter will only be born once.
I say, and you didn't ask her to reschedule, huh?
No, she got to come whenever she wanted. And she like we made a bit of a mistake. I guess I'm drifting away from Magic a little bit, but we were moving. Like we moved, and then the move kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and we were just right up to the due date. So we moved into our apartment 2 weeks to the day before we went to the hospital to receive Sophia, and then work was getting done on the place up until the day before we went to the hospital. I don't recommend anybody do that.
That is so wild. That is so wild. That reminds me of when I got married. We did our wedding the day after graduation from college.
I remember you telling me this. That's stacking life events on top of each other.
But that's exactly what you just did. You can't point your finger at me.
And I don't recommend it.
Well, without probing too far into how you maybe some of the practical elements of that for your work, like, do you find that there are any helpful things about trying to find that division, like how you balance, especially when your work looks a lot like what you do for fun?
Yeah. So part of it is I try to keep the nature of things that I do separate. When I first started, that was easy. Cube was stuff that I did for fun outside of work, and everything else was work. And then I was tasked with working on Cube, alongside the phenomenal, brilliant David McDarby. And then everything has been a bit more challenging. And then beyond that point, really, Magic outside of work for me is either a way of connecting with and hanging out with friends, with should have been in that sentence. And most commonly, that's just going to Wednesday night cubes at Upkeep, which Scott Mertzopoulos, guest of the Cube, frequents. Dan Schneider, already called out in the Cube, is there every week. Doing that, team drafting with my friends, and then just trying to design weird cubes, the likes of which I would never showcase at work. That's how I try and maintain that balance.
That's fair. Yeah, the things you can't do elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. But also, if something is your job, and especially if you're passionate about it, what's that phrase? Do find a way to get paid to do what you love, and you'll never work another day in your life. Both true and utterly false. Because
Yeah.
like you'll never work. No, you'll never relax another day in your life because you have no barrier and your work can permeate into everything. I've invested over a decade in trying to create very firm boundaries. Something like this, listening to podcasts, is that relative into my work? Yeah, but also I enjoy it sufficiently and I don't use it to directly inform a bunch of my work. So yeah, this is part of the play aspect. And why does it get to be there? Community. I feel like I'm jumping on perhaps some of the questions you were gonna ask.
No. I mean, goodness, the questions are only if we get stuck somewhere. Really, I love to listen.
And let's riff.
Zach, you have spoken at length about a number of different ideas on our friend's show, the Lucky Paper Radio podcast. A whole bunch of great ideas about game design and various thoughts that go into that, particularly in the cube space. But I wanted to ask more generally, as we're jumping into things, why cube? What is it that brings you back to this way to play with such a broad creative background like yours?
I love this question, and I've chewed on this. I've heard you ask it before, and I know I talked about it a bit earlier, but for me, it really is the community, the cube community. So to tell a story, like everybody always assumes cube is my favorite way to play Magic, and truthfully, limited is. Booster draft, team draft have always been my biggest loves, and cube was something that I just sort of like did for fun in between sets. And then my first big moment in my community where I went from being sort of, because I come from an extremely spiky team drafting community based out of New York City. I remember a friend of mine did a cube tournament, and I was just sort of like one of the folks there. And I like snuck into top eight, and then I played my friend Hugh, who I talked about earlier in this podcast. Probably my number one Magic rival, one of my closest Magic friends, and the best dang person I've played with consistently in New York. I played him in his cube, and I won it. And I won a Taiga that he would then win from me in a different tournament later on, which both of these are covered in Hipsters articles, which I guess I have not mentioned that previously, but I don't need to talk about my past. But anyway, all that's to say, like, Cube was this welcoming into a community. And then several years ago, Derek of Derek's Cube got me to go to the first CubeCon. I started drafting people's cubes online and got very into that space. But like, I just, so many of the people in this community are so smart and so insightful and so fun to talk to. And it just keeps coming, has me coming back for more. I love going to Cube events, and the biggest things that I want out of them are not domination. I'm not trying to win. I want to be inspired by people's creativity. I want to be exposed to more diverse backgrounds and viewpoints and perspectives than I get in my relatively large bubble in New York City. So, I don't know. That's why Cube. Also, I love Cube, and now I make cubes as part of my job.
So, beyond just the experience of experiencing so much with something like Cube, you're also purportedly a really strong player. Do you think that connection comes from the design side, or do you think? I mean, I know it's obviously a cycle going back and forth, but like, which do you think feeds into the other between design and play skill?
So, a couple things. Part of it is I have a strong background in competitive Magic. New York City's Team Draft League was just a very strong assemblage of players in the early and mid 2010s. I was a founding member of that. I played it consistently. I was one of the commissioners. That's why I think I'm a strong player. But from a design perspective, I've had a lot of people ask me who wanted to become game designers, do I need to be, as particularly ones from a Magic background, do I need to be a really strong player? And I say no. Game design pulls from many, many different backgrounds. There are so many different paths into it. And I think being very strong at playing games can both be a strength and a hindrance. I've seen this happen a lot where people, particularly who are playtesting their games, get too good at them and lose touch of the average player.
Yeah.
And I think if you have an overly strong competitive background, it's very easy to not even give yourself a complexity budget, to not really think that much about the various audiences you might be designing for. And especially if you don't have a tight knit group of similarly backgrounded, competitive, experienced players. And if you're taking a cube to an event, it can probably set people up for a bad time if you're not aware of that part of the background. I feel like I potentially lost sight of the question, but all that's to say, I don't think being a strong player is like, it's sort of net neutral to being a designer. It can help you design for certain audiences, but it can make you design too much for the top of the pyramid, which I think that's more likely to hurt you than help you with the long, if you're trying to be like a published designer, because you need to design for the bottom of the pyramid. You need to make everybody's first experience with the game awesome more than you need to make everybody's 20th experience with the game awesome.
Yeah, like if the whole pool is a deep end, it's very difficult to learn to swim.
Yeah. You can create the best designed metagame possible, but if that metagame can only ever fit 20 people who will sit through the like 50 hours of prerequisite misery to get to that point, the odds of your game being successful, the odds of people ever wanting to play your cube a second time, are really, really hard. Or maybe you will, but like one person out of every 20 drafters will ever want to play it again. And it's going to take you a few months just to get that second pod together. The second pod is going to love it. And that's okay. But like, you need to find that pod.
That we found our people. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Similarly, I've designed things that were intended for niche successes. Like the Cascade Cube, which we may talk about, or we may not talk about much more beyond this. That's one that I specifically designed for KubeCon 2023 as an experience that I recognized was not going to be for everybody, but it was something that I found it was a great love it or hate it experience. It didn't do a great job of communicating itself via clear elevator pitch. It sounds like silly, wacky fun times. And actually, it is the spikiest thing I will ever design, which is not what I set out to do. But there was a deep enough pool of players at KubeCon who either were there for the utter insanity or were like, "Oh, I get what this is about, and I am here for it." But I would not design that for necessarily my local cube group, although my local cube group, I guess, has enough enfranchised people who actually do enjoy it. But if that makes sense, I knew going in that I was designing something that wasn't going to have the broadest appeal, rather than be surprised by that when I disappointed and frustrated a lot of people. When people were
Mm.
disappointed and frustrated, I was prepared for that because I wanted it to be something that wasn't for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really it's kind of a self-awareness thing, right? Like for the goal of this project isn't going to hit every target.
Absolutely. And I think part of design is about identifying what are your audiences, what are your restrictions, what are your timelines, and like all of these questions are things that you're asking constantly in professional game design. And ideally, oh, what I'll just quote Mark Rosewater: "If everybody likes your game but nobody loves it, your game won't be successful." The same is
Mm.
true in Cube. To a lesser extent, I mean, you can make like perfectly enjoyable experiences, but I think the more interesting design veins are make something that some number of people are going to love, even though that means some people are going to hate it, because doing that means you are making clear, strong decisions rather than making something sort of mushy that's kind of for everybody but also for nobody at the same time. But I also don't want to make that too loud of a pronouncement, because also, like, if you want to make something that's a crowd pleaser, there are so many things that are great crowd pleasers that aren't doing anything revolutionary but are still incredibly fun. And for some people, that is the totality of Cube. So I don't want to sound like I'm yucking anyone's yum there. I guess I'm more talking about both what's valuable from a professional design perspective and what gets me most excited in the space.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable caveat too, right? Like not to downplay if anybody has a pursuit that's a little more open-ended than that. But like I also know that as a musician, a trumpet player in particular, it's one of those where we're told often if you're going to make a mistake, make a big mistake because then at
Yeah,
least you can correct it or that you're able to show, "Hey, this is what I intended to do." So that resonates for me.
there's a lot of value in being distinct and being original. And also, there's a lot of value in recognizing that originality is itself kind of false, and too many people shoot too hard for it. And sometimes making a beautiful mistake is going to be the greatest teacher of opening up a world of possibilities you never expected. And you're only going to do that if you shoot a lot of different shots.
Hey, that glass shattered in a way that I've never seen before. Let's follow up on that.
Somebody call Ella.
So, with a deep tool belt of resources and experience for building cubes, or I guess building any type of creative project, do you find that your approach to designing, like, is it tough to maintain I don't know, a spirit of fun to that? Like, does it become mechanical at a point?
Ooh, I like this question. And I'm actually going to push back against one of the things that you preface this with, which I know is a compliment. So forgive me if I'm seeming
I
ingracious.
will not accept your compliments, but I will accept your questions.
I don't actually think of myself as that creative a person. I've worked with people who are like stunningly brilliant at just coming up with ideas off the cuff. I don't think that's who I am. I think I have a very good, very refined process that I got from other people of just like iterative design, which I've talked about on Lucky Paper. But I feel less like I am this brilliant genius plucking concepts from the ether, and more I have a process where like a design gets to flow through me and I just sort of get to watch it take shape, and I watch my playtesters figure it out kind of for me. And to answer your question, that's where I find the joy of this process of discovery. Of I ask a question I don't know the answer to, and which the Cascade Cube very much was, among other things. And then I just sort of let the project unfold before me. And I don't feel a complete sense of ownership over what it becomes. It's a very shared sense of ownership from all the input and experiences that other people have shared with me from playing the darn thing. And I don't know. At the end of the process, I'm like, I don't know how I got here, but I'm loved that I did.
We've mentioned the Cascade Cube here, and I do want to use the Cascade Cube as a jumping off point for an idea that you and I had kind of explored potentially discussing here. Yeah, I remember seeing, I believe you wrote this somewhere about the Cascade Cube, and you said, I set out to achieve a specific goal. It did the thing I wanted, and now I have to decide how much more effort to put into
Mm.
it. That was a really resonant idea. We talked some about what does it look like to sunset a cube, or like what happens when, to use the phrase you just used, like when your audience restrictions, timelines, when those all change, like when your goals are met, what do you do from there?
Yeah. I also just realized I've talked about the Cascade Cube a bunch. I never actually said what it is.
Yeah, so we should probably do that, huh?
So the Cascade Cube is a rules modified cube or an emblem cube or a clown shoes cube, depending on which term you prefer, with one simple but giant modification. Everyone begins the game with a Maelstrom Nexus emblem in the command zone, which cannot be disabled or interacted with. Maelstrom Nexus says the first spell you cast each turn has Cascade. Cascade is you basically cast a cheaper spell from your library or don't. And
Most of the
yeah,
time you do.
most of the time that you do, and there's a tons of little tips and tricks with it. But yeah, that was a cube that I designed that was inspired directly by my experiences at the first KubeCon for the second KubeCon. And it took a bunch of iteration. I refined that thing over the process of a year. I did a lot of playtests. It changed a bunch, and it's pretty stable. And I'm more interested in what's the next thing. I've made several, I have a bunch of different weird cube projects in the aftermath, and I'm still maintaining the Cascade Cube, but some people deeply enjoy continually maintaining their cubes. And for me, as somebody who I built my first cube in 2013, and there was a moment like COVID happened, and then I didn't play my cube for a while, and I realized, oh, I've been updating my cube for 5 years, and I played it once, and I don't want to break it down, but I'm getting less joy out of maintaining this than I am out of designing new experiences.
Hmm.
And that both reminded me I want to update this cube again and actually play with it. And projects don't need to be forever. Some people, they want their projects to be that. For me, I don't know. I want to maintain the Cascade Cube because I think it's still bringing people joy and I still have a lot of fun playing it. But also, it doesn't change that much from set to set because most sets aren't going to like create impending, the last mechanic that just made radically change the cube. And by radically change the cube, I meant added 5 cards to the cube.
Yeah, right. Well, that's pretty radical when a cube is stable.
True, true. And I love what they do and I love how they support the YOLO archetype. But I think so much of game design, cube design, being a human being is self knowledge and self understanding. And for me, yeah, I derive so much joy out of the process of being in community, being inspired, transforming inspiration into a question I don't know the answer to, building prototypes, iterating those prototypes, presenting them, and then at some specified deadline, being done. That makes me happier.
In that spirit of inspiration, in these recent years, we've seen a pretty significant increase in emblem cubes or gimmick cubes that really can trace their ancestry to a project like Cascade Cube. We've had a couple folks on this program mention your Cascade Cube as an inspiration, like a core kernel for them. How do you feel about being a source of inspiration like that for other designers?
It's incredibly flattering and it's humbling. Just like I love being inspired, it really warms my heart that I can be a source of inspiration or aid for anybody else out there. I've had a lot of great opportunities in life. I had the ability to go to grad school for game design, which is unheard of, and I try and use that privilege to help people better self-express themselves, to have a little bit not necessary grammar and vocabulary, but just sort of tools that they could use to share their thoughts, which is something I know a lot of people struggle with. And when I get to do that in any way, and getting to do that even for a couple people in the Cube community makes me feel like my life has purpose. I don't know. I mean, I'm a parent, so my life definitely has purpose.
Yeah.
I am keeping my daughter alive and loving every moment of it. But I think one of the best things that we can do on this earth is help touch other people's lives, make them better, be a positive influence, set an example so that hopefully we leave this world in a better place than we found it, even if it's only in this tiny subgroup of people who play the giant game that is Magic, which is one game of many on this earth of 7 billion people.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the fact that you and I are sitting in different parts of the country right now talking about talking about pretty big things through the lens of a game kind of speaks to that and
Yeah.
its power to bring people together.
Oh, and also I want to give credit to the giants whose shoulders that I stand on, because while I'm humbled that the Cascade Cube is inspired on the people, the Cascade Cube is directly inspired by two people who I believe have both been on this podcast before. Anthony Maddox's The Turbo Cube and Daniel Wheatley's Reading Rainbow Cube are both rules modified cubes that I was had the pleasure of being exposed to at the first CubeCon. And I can talk about the design process at length, but like again, everybody stands on the shoulders of giants, and they get all the credit for this project existing. Anthony just getting me excited about radical recontextualization, cards that are performing very, very differently than in the context they're from. And in particular, something like Guild Globe going from, yeah, like that's a fine card in War of the Spark draft to like, this is better than Black Lotus.
So yeah, this
And
is
then like,
power.
oh, I kind of get to do that with the Alara border posts in Cascade Cube. There are all these dreams that I can live. That's from the Turbo Cube. And for Daniel's, like I know I've said this to Daniel multiple times at this point, but the Reading Rainbow Cube is an excellent example of elegant player focused design. The Reading Rainbow Cube, Turbo Cube is a cube where there's an emblem where every spell and activated ability costs 2 mana less. So Guild Globe is a 0 mana artifact that draws a card and produces 2 mana. The Reading Rainbow Cube is an all gold multicolored cube, which has a really challenging prompt to it of how do you do fixing where every card costs at least 2 different colors of mana. And rather than put a ton of fixing in, Daniel gave every single player a Pillar of the Perunes, or Perunes, however it's pronounced. I don't know everything. Which taps for 1 mana of any color, but only from multicolored spells. And then it creates this dynamic where it deletes the color from a single pip of mana in every colored spell's cost. But then how do you double spell? And besides all of that, the Turbo Cube, I love it, but it has this active translation you need to do on every mana cost you see in reading, which adds to the mental taxation, which is of an already cognitively heavy cube. Reading Rainbow just gives you a magic card, and magic players know how to play with magic cards. And so that was the restriction I set up for the Cascade Cube. I picked a magic card that is very complicated, has a lot of weird rules interactions, is very, very splashy, but still fundamentally is a game state that you can get into a abnormal but still normal game of Magic in a way that might never happen with the Turbo Cube unless very, very specific things happen.
And if any of those projects sound interesting to our listeners, I have had both of those folks on the show at different times. So
And they're both lovely human beings.
they are. So if you want to hear the designers talk at length about those too. But yeah, getting to grab those little elements of I like this from this place and this from this other place. I heard someone suggest that we become an average of the 5 people we spend the most time with.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, sorry, dropping those in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, like those things that we spend our time and our energies around, being able to take little things from that we appreciate and add them into other stuff that we're working on. It's cool to see where those lines come from.
And yeah, that's like part of the interesting story of who we are as we get older. We spend time with different people, and then you notice subtle shifts in the way that you speak or how you spend. Oh, I'm gonna take that. I like that.
That one's free. So when you're thinking of something like the Cascade Cube, because you've had an opportunity to share on things like Lucky Paper, we've seen its impact on other projects. What does it look like when you realize this is something that I may not want to spend as much time on right now? Is it like, does this get disassembled? Does it just go on a shelf to be revisited later? Where does that land for you?
Um, the Cascade Cube, I passively am updating it, but I'm not disassembling it both because I still really enjoy playing it and friends still ask to play with it. And I haven't actually brought it to that many events. But to talk about sunsetting cubes, there was a cube that I made for the first CubeCon, the terribly named Ultimate Masters Inspired Cube, which was a cube I've been wanting to make for multiple years because I just love Ultimate Masters Limited. And in particular, like several of the touchstone moments of that environment of frantic search into Fiery Temper and another madness spell, or spider spawning and spider spawning loops, or young pyromancer. I just wanted to create an environment where I got to have that experience, maybe in a somewhat different way, but I could have it over and over again. That's a project that I just made for myself. And I playtested it once and I ignored all my playtesters' feedback because I was designing it for me. And then I did it at KubeCon and I was like, I did the thing. I'm kind of happy to play with this more, but I'm more excited about this kernel of an idea that became the Cascade Cube. And like that's a cube that can change radically with every expansion. There's always spells and graveyard things and artifacts because I wanted to add those in. But I haven't felt guilty or sad with the fact that it's been lying on a shelf for 3 years. And I've pulled cards from it as I've needed it elsewhere. It feels like the cutting room floor of a game I've worked on, of finished games. And I wouldn't be surprised if this every cube designer listening to this feels similarly. Every project is an iceberg where you see the 10% on the surface, you don't see the 90% on the cutting room floor. And what I always tell myself when I put something on the cutting room floor, even if it was at one point the central part of the project, the thing that was working the best, I can always make something else. I can always use this idea elsewhere. I'm trying to make this project the best project it can be. I can always make something new in the future. And my goal is always for the next thing I make to be the best thing I have ever made at that point, and the worst thing I will ever make after that point, which I find very reassuring and very makes it much easier to both kill my darlings, cut things from projects, and revisit things in the future.
Do you think that it's appropriate to think of something like a cube as having a lifetime?
It depends on what your goals are. I've designed cubes for specific events. And before that, like when I was first getting into cube, this was my cube. And it was one of the few cubes we had in the rotation. And it was a forever thing. There was less pressure on me to constantly be creating new cubes, both because I think I'm going to be going to fewer events for the foreseeable future. And upkeep, the weekly cube night, which I'm hoping to go back to this week, assuming I can get a backup. I'm not going to just leave my wife alone.
Or just bring Sophia to be your team drafter?
I I I will only teach her magic if she really wants to learn. I don't need her to like those things, but also I think we're a bit of a ways away. But even for upkeep, we have so many creative people and just so many people as part of that community. There's not a need for me to make a forever project. So I'm more interested in what's something novel, what's a question that I can ask that I don't know the answer to. And that kind of thing can cook for a while and also will lead to a first play test that might lead to me apologizing to people who didn't realize that they were showing up for a play test rather than a polished, fully created thing. But I love that process of janky play tests where you learn lots of things and where you're not sure how it's going to end, rather than refined things that are meant to be forever pieces.
So aren't most cube drafts in a way a playtest, or are you referring to like the more specific? Hey, this is first outing, kind of figuring out if these pieces work
The more
together.
specific first outing kind of thing. Like my first outing of Cascade Cube was at, if it was SEG Con, it was a Star City event, I think in January of 2023. And like it was a mess, but I think I had made the rules reminder for the very first one, but still like there were too many mechanics that were hard to understand and too many rules interactions and too many things that didn't quite function. And as ever, as is always the case with Cascade Cube, like half the table got the joke and figured out like, oh, Mox Tantalite is the greatest card ever. And half the table were just like, oh, I bet Averna the Chaos Bloom is good. And the answer is Averna the Chaos Bloom is sweet. And I have been so excited about that card. And it is never good enough because it is resolving a 3-mana card that needs something else to happen afterwards.
Yeah, those radical context shifts are they're so tricky, and so often that seems to be a theme I've come across is everybody needs to draft it a second time to go, okay, now that I understand,
Yeah,
like
that's
now that I know what's up, I can hit it again.
when people draft the Cascade Cube for the first time. I literally tell them the first time doesn't count, and most of the second time doesn't count either. Most people like after the first draft, you'll probably have a sense of whether you're like, I never want to play this again, or I can't wait to play this again.
Yeah.
And then after the second draft, you are ready to crush because that cube is. I didn't design it to be super skill testing, but it is It so rewards knowing what you're doing. And oh man, I love playing at a pot of the Cascade Cube where like everybody has done a draft before. Everybody gets what you don't pass. Just like for people who are just powered cube grinders, folks are like, oh yeah, this Mox Emerald card is really, really strong, even though it looks like a forest. And you might think, wow, isn't that obvious? But congratulations, if you're having that thought, you are already in the like hyper enfranchised competitive 1% of all Magic players of all time, even though it seems obvious, which is, I guess, goes back to the earlier thing we brought up of how it can be a disadvantage to be a very enfranchised or very competitive or very experienced player. It's so easy to forget the experience of the average person looking at a pack of 15 cards that 10 of them they've never seen before. And there's a special rule there that applies a translation to
Right.
everything that they're seeing.
So you're not just recontextualizing, you have to contextualize it for the first time in a place that you're never going to do again like that.
And for the majority of players, that is impossible and unpleasant. And the question is just when they get stomped into the pavement, do they at least have enough fun being like, I want to try that again? Or have you just given them a bad time?
This reminds me so much of mid to high weight board games where
Mm.
several people have played and you're bringing in somebody or somebody's new, and it's like, well, we already know the gimmick, or like we already know kind of which direction you're gonna get stomped this first time. They like, but follow along and maybe you'll enjoy it after that. Like, that was just an experience that I was thinking about while you were describing that.
I've had that experience plenty of times. And like having worked on extremely crunchy, like heavyweight board games, that's part of the reason why in my off time I spent so much time designing and just playing lightweight party games that also, oh, like you're playing this for the first time, congratulations, it's One Night Ultimate Werewolf. You're going to make a terrible mistake and lose the game or just be silent for like 7 minutes, and then you're going to get the joke, and then 15 minutes in we'll have played 2 games already and you're ready to go, as opposed to we have been playing for 15 minutes, we will be finished with setup in 10 more minutes. And then in 3 hours, you can try and reflect upon the mistakes that you made at the first 15-minute mark that only truly bore fruit at the 2 hour mark.
Yeah, there are a few things more disheartening than realizing I lost because of a decision I made 2 hours ago that I had no way of knowing was the was the important one.
There was one board game that I played that I won't name, but I I was sort of overwhelmed by it. It was a mid to heavyweight board game, but I was just like, okay, I'm a designer. I'd rather fumble my way through a game and learn systems rather than try and optimize my turns. I try and take very fast turns and just learn. And I identified a very simple, very boring strategy that sort of ignored the cool experimental core mechanic of the game, which just so happened to be a first past the post mechanic, which discourages anybody from being in second. So I just did the boring thing over and over again. And the game designers did not expect anybody to play that way. And so the final scores were something like 67, 71, 73, and me with 174 points.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And like, it was very clear I had won the game from like 30 minutes in, but the game took 3 hours. And so the whole game
Oh
was a
man.
race to second where I didn't count. And I never played it again. But also, I enjoy learning more than I enjoy winning. And in that game, I was like, I learned something that cube designers are already talking about plenty, which is make the most fun thing to do the best way to win the game. Don't create buttons that are really boring that help you win, that guarantee your win, because then you either have people racing for second or you have the unfortunate situation of both the people who are losing and the person who's winning aren't having the best time.
Yeah, I mean, you've described it. I don't want to say universal, but a pretty common cube experience, right? Where
Yes.
there are those paths that people don't see sometimes inadvertently in how they construct something, where somebody goes, "Oh, yeah, this thing just wins," and that may not have been the intent.
Yes. And that's an experience cube designers are most often thinking about in terms of balance and power level outliers. But I also think it's when you're going off the beaten path and you're coming up with something interesting and novel. I don't want to come up with an example because I don't want it to sound like I'm calling anybody in particular out, but try and make sure that the cool thing that your cube is doing is good and is supported. The most common error I'll call it an error. I feel decent. I don't want to call anybody out in particular, but just like you come up with a cool thing. And then because that cool thing is a pillar of your cube, you add interaction. And then because that thing is the central thing in your cube, you add a lot of interaction. And then because the density of interaction is so high, it completely undermines the cool new thing that you've done. And now you have a cube where like the bottom 50% of cards, the cards that sit in everybody's sideboards, are all the cool new things you did because you inadvertently stifled them from being played in the
Yeah.
environment because you over indexed on it being the central thing, when the ideal thing is stop at making the cool thing the best thing and then let players identify where it's gone too far.
And then by extension, if I'm reading what you're saying there, is you don't want to punish people for doing the thing that you want to be the cool thing and the good thing.
Yeah, actually, here's an example I can make up from the Cascade Cube. I have never added cards like Rule of Law to the Cascade Cube. Rule of
Right.
Law is a
Yeah.
card that says each player can only cast one spell per turn. Now, you might think, on the one hand, oh, like Rule of Law is unplayable in most cubes, and oh, I remember that card from when I was playing X anti-combo deck or playing it out of my sideboard in some year um,
Yeah.
that begins with
Way back when.
2000 or 2010. Or Eidolon of Rhetoric, which is the same thing, but on a creature. And the Cascade Cube as a unique affordance that that card could be played there. But I'm making an implicit promise to my players, build around the Maelstrom Nexus emblem. You should do this. And then if I put a card like that in the cube, I'm going to make somebody feel stupid for listening to me. I'm going to undermine the central part of the experience that I put in there. I've tested out cards like Lodestone Golem and Thalia, which make it a little bit harder, and Lodestone Golem comes down much later. And even then, those might be over the line, but I wanted to tiptoe towards that line rather than just be like, yep, here are these 5 cards that disable the cube entirely.
Well, and as you've described, you're asking a question. You're trying to determine, is this viable? Like, is this actually going to topple the cart the way I think it will, without just pre-toppling the cart?
Yeah, I'd rather the cart topple itself than me put in a self-toppling cart. And then the best thing to do is, yeah, topple the cart and then hope the other person was the fool that listened to the cube designer and is sitting on the cart.
There's probably a limit to metaphors somewhere, but I don't think we're there yet. um,
I'm having a great time. This is awesome.
oh no, that's so fun. I'm reminded of in the cube that I work on most regularly, which is with plus one counters. And I remember when Solemnity was, or people were talking about Solemnity, like, aren't you putting that in the cube? And I was like, no, of course not. Like, why would I put a tool in that's going to absolutely ruin what the whole cube is about? It's like, well, is it an answer? No, not really. It just shuts down the whole thing. So
Yeah, there's a reason that unless it's very avant-garde, we don't have concerts that have a mute button that anybody can push, or the ability to have 1,000 remote activated vuvuzelas go off. No shade against the instrument, just in general, if you're at a concert, people are there to listen to the concert and not drown it out.
I like this comparison. That's really cool. Now I do want a button that cues vuvuzelas, though.
Oh, I mean, I think if you're designing an experience that's just like, no, this is an experience that Vuvuzella's going off in the middle of it, like enhances the experience or adds to the uncertainty of the experience or actually is secretly a installation that is designed to teach people how to use vuvuzelas, because secretly I've just purchased 10,000 vuvuzelas and I'm selling them on my music shop, or because the instrument has a rich cultural history that too many people ignore, and they brush off the instrument when actually it's fascinating and more people should know about vuvuzelas. Yeah, I don't know. I'm down this tangent and I'm enjoying it.
I mean, I have one. It's not right here by my desk, but I'll need to grab it before we wrap up.
Oh, that's cool.
I really appreciate the idea you've been talking about what question do I want to answer. Are there questions that designers should be considering if they're looking toward sunsetting a project, or to see whether or not they should sunset a project they're working on?
Yeah. So the easiest question to ask, and I think the first question designers will ask, though I think not actually the first question designers ought to be asking, is this still fun? Are my players still enjoying it? Am I still enjoying it? The first question that I try and ask myself and that I encourage aspiring or professional or any designers or cube creators if people prefer that position, though I think cube design is definitely game design. Why am I doing this? For me, like professional game design is this is how I pay my rent. And there are a lot of restrictions. I have timelines that I need to do. Why am I doing this project? Because my client or my employer wants needs this done in this certain way on this certain timeline with these restrictions. Why are we making a cube? Well, for a lot of people, the obvious answer is, well, I'm doing it because it's fun. But even then, what you enjoy is different for other people. Some people are seeking, just like with the magic psychographics, which I realize I'm about to dip into, some people are in cube design for self-expression. There is a part of themselves that they want to share with the world. For me, the Ultimate Masters inspired cube, the Yume Plus cube, that was that. I had an experience that I wanted to experience it again. I wasn't designing it for other people, and having done that, I can always pick it up. But I moved on to things that were driving more interest. For the Cascade cube, my question there was, can I make a novel rules modified environment inspired by these precursors? And my timeline and restrictions are this has to be done in time for KubeCon 2023. So for designers, I would first say, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you have a cube community that's a small, tight knit group of people? You want to keep that group of people together, and you're the person who has cube. That's true for a lot of people, and the need for cube will be there, except maybe until somebody else builds their cube, and you can put yours down for a bit and see, is this still satisfying its need? For me, I ask, like, have I hit my deadline? Have I answered my questions? For other people, I don't know, a cube is an aesthetic project. I talked about this on Lucky Paper, but like I've seen a lot of cubes that I feel like were about the tactile experience of the cards. What is it? Jeff Green's Old Board of Foil cube, which I feel like so much of it is about looking at the cards and having memories. Or from the very first
Yeah.
Cube Con, the Dichotomy cube, which I feel like is an art piece that was just about like creating an experience that feels like it's meant to be in a museum and admired in that way. But also, if that's what the designer was going for, and we never spoke, so I forgive me if I'm putting words in their mouth, like that's a design that is complete as soon as the first iteration is done, because you have your cycles. It is perfect in that iteration with white sleeves and black sleeves, or white cards and black cards. What are you trying to do, and have you accomplished those goals? Are you not accomplishing that goal and you need to revisit what you're doing? Are you currently and actively and continuously accomplishing that goal? And if the answer is, yeah, I'm done, I've satisfied the thing, I wanted to have fun, I'm not having fun anymore, that's your invitation to do something new, especially if your community has other cubes that are a part of it and people still have a hankering for cube draft.
That's great. And those are great perspectives to have. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So you've written a whole lot about magic over the years. I remember seeing somewhere that you've put down over 1 million words in print on the topic of this, as you noted, niche game.
Yes. I was not a founding member, but I started writing for Hipsters of the Coast in 2013 when it was a few months old. I had a weekly column called Drawing Live where I talked about a bunch of things, some of it cube, but most of it was game design through the lens of magic. And then somehow 10 years passed and I kept writing that column. And gosh, I only get to write a few times a year now when I'm writing for the mothership. But I loved writing. I loved how it refined my voice, how I think it made me a better game designer. And I love that Hipsters, after losing their funding, is back and putting out a few articles right now. And I encourage everybody to check them out.
Well, so as someone who is actively working on this game and perhaps being in a conversation like this takes the teeth out of this question, but do you feel like there's still more to say?
Uh, yeah. MTG Data Science was talking about this, I think like a week or two ago. They very graciously were a fan of my series called Design of a Card, where I would just use one card as a lens to talk about something. And usually I wrote those articles when I had scrapped an article and it was like 2 hours before deadline, and I could just like throw one of these together really quickly. And I was like, no, there's still so many cards that are coming out that I'm just like, I love the story of this elegant design. The very first thing that came to mind is Dragon's Prey from Tarkir Dragonstorm. 2 and a black,
Sure.
instant destroy target creature, but it costs 2 more if it's a dragon. And I'm like, that's such a good little bit of resonant storytelling. And that's a design that exists in dialogue with cards like Go for the Throat that came out in 2010, I think, or 2011 from Mirrodin Besieged, or Ultimate Price from Return to Ravnica. And both of those are examples of removal spells that intentionally don't work well in that limited environment because they are reinforcing what the set is about. And Dragon's Prey is doing that, but doing that in a way that performs its function better in limited, but also tell the story that dragons have a harder time hunting other dragons because dragons are apex predators. And it does all of that in a single, simple, load-bearing common design. And that's 1 card. And there are 5 others that come to mind as soon as I go on this kind of a ramble. So yeah, I guess I'm out of things to talk about Magic. I'm done. And that's the thing though, like every single card has so much work and thought that goes into it and exists in a context. And just like we're talking about how we stand on the shoulders of giants, I'm flattered that anybody was inspired by the Cascade Cube, and I want to give so much of the credit to Daniel and Anthony and the organizers of CubeCon for making that happen, and Derek for making me go to the event in the first place. Cards do that too. Cards exist in dialogue with over 30 years of history, and charting all of those design innovations over time. Because Dragon's Prey, I think a card exactly in that vein, I'm not sure if it's ever existed. We've had cards that have been discounted or cost more under certain conditions, but that specific thing of, oh, here's the removal spell. Oftentimes it's priced for standard, sometimes it's made for limited. This is a limited focused one that does its job super, super well, but also does it in the novel way of not actually disabling it. Like, to any aspiring designer who loves Cube or loves Magic, I would just say, look at a set and pick a card, pick a random common, and identify, even if the card only has 10 words or 15 words or 8 words on it, just how much thought goes into it, just how the name reinforces it. I'm not saying this as somebody who is here being like, well, I work for Wizards and I want you to love the game. I love this game. I have loved Magic for 30 years. I learned how to play in 1995. The game still gives me that level of excitement. I still love seeing cards come out like that. And I still have easily another million words that I would be happy to write about the game.
That's awesome. That's so good to hear. It's such an encouragement to hear.
And I'll also say this is an example of something that still brings me joy. And I mean, yeah, I don't have a column anymore, so I'm kind of bursting with words in that regard. And similarly have not been talking Magic that much over the last month because I've had other priorities. So please forgive me, and especially listeners, forgive me for rambling on and on today.
No, there's a grace that babies are generally pretty good listeners, you know.
Yeah.
Well, as you noted, there is so much more we could say, and I hope this isn't our last chance to connect to do so. Um, I do want to ask, though, if you could try to summarize some of the advice, or if you could give particular advice to other designers wherever they are on their own journey, what would you offer to them?
Yes, I love this question. I've been listening to Recross the Past since the very beginning. I love doing what I can to give back to the community. I mean, as we talked, I've written articles about game design. I've given talks on game design at conventions. And I have a list of things that I love to encourage game designers to talk about, some of which I've talked about in this episode. And I loved in Recross the Past hearing you ask that question, be like, oh, what if I had to condense it down to one thing, what would I do? And then it was like, Greg hit that one on my list, and Jake did, and Dam did, and Roger was great. Um, okay, Ollie, okay. Arlo, okay. Gwen, and man, they just like designers just like ticked off all of these hard-won pieces of knowledge that I either like taught myself or more likely learned from other people. And if I were to sort of go down that list of what's there, I'd say like one of the best things a designer can do is expose themselves to diverse perspectives. We all exist in our own bubbles, and it's so easy to only design for ourselves or design for the people that we know or design from the people that have the same background as us. And if you really want to grow as a person and as a designer, you want to expose yourself to a lot of different ways of being, a lot of different methods of thought, a lot of different design approaches. There are many different forms of diversity. If you want to do that in cube design, The number one thing that I would say to expose yourself to a bunch of different diverse perspectives, ways of thinking, one of the best things that I would say to an aspiring cube designer, listen to Recross the Paths.
Oh no, no, that's too much.
Yep. Nope. I have known I was going to be saying that when I was on this podcast, and told Bones as such back when he was in town. I was like, nope, that's the only thing that I have left.
Well, it's exceptionally kind.
That is a compliment, and I force you to accept it because it is true.
I will take it so long as I can also acknowledge that the joy is in, as you said, the strength of diversity and inspiration of ideas that come from all sorts of other people. So it's not me as much as it is everybody else doing the cool things.
Excellent judo, Cade.
Well, I do have another question that I like to ask here. Zach, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
So, I love having cards that have reminder text. Lots of promos don't have that. And
Preach.
I realize one of my favorite cards does not actually have a version of itself yet with up-to-date Oracle text.
Okay, I'm ready.
So that card is Callous Dismissal from War of the Spark.
Yeah, with a mass.
Which needs to say amass zombies, because amass orcs exists now. And as for an artist, I was like, oh man, I want maybe something a little less bullish. Like, who's an artist that isn't Rebecca Gay or Kai Folio, who I both adore, and obviously, but I was like, actually, there's one artist that isn't doing magic artwork anymore, but illustrated a couple of like pieces from my childhood that I just loved. You know, Willow Dryad from the original Portal by D. Alexander Gregory, who also did, I think, all of the M12 Planeswalkers.
Oh, yeah, this is cool.
I would love D. Alexander Gregory using that like awesome, just sort of various colors of light, doing an interpretation of Callous Dismissals with the up-to-date Oracle text and reminder text.
That's so good. And yeah, I love it, especially on the Willow Dryad.
Or like Searing Touch, Lightning Elemental, or that like Goblin Lore.
Right, yeah, you get kind of these, I don't know, the dappled lighting is something that I'm just a sucker for. So anything in that space, and especially a spell like Callous Dismissal that's about evaporating something, I'm really interested in that.
And I love War of the Spark Limited. I love all the modalities of that card, all the ways that it worked. And that's my pet card that I will sneak into every cube that it makes sense.
Hey, well, you're preaching to the choir there. I run Callous Dismissal, and I like it pretty well.
It even has counters. Well, I want to thank you for squeezing me in here. We've talked for a fair bit about being on. Perhaps it's no surprise that I'm a fan of the pod. Very grateful that I both managed to be here, and my daughter has been incredible. She's such a good sleeper that I've been have enough presence of mind to be able to make it on. And again, thank you for having me, Cade. And I'm very excited about your upcoming expansion as well.
Thank you so much. No, I'm so excited, and really, I'm so grateful for your time as well. You know, there is something funny about. We perhaps won't divulge how long we've gone back and forth to find a good time to connect. But just a real treasure to have this moment, and I'm thankful so much for your inspiration to me and to so many others along this little project, and that we get to share this season of parenting in a unique way through this game. So thanks for being part of this conversation and this whole endeavor together.
Yeah, hopefully, our ever increasingly complicated lives will allow us to recross our paths. Oh, I wasn't even intending that pun there, but do that at some point, or maybe even hit the same event at some point. But yeah, thank you so much for all that you do and all the good that you put in the world.
My son's screaming in the back. It's just the best. That's the best outro. Oh,
thank you for the good you do in the world.
That's so good.